So welcome to the Digital Economist from the World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland. We are holding our inaugural roundtable and very excited to have a huge turnover and a highly curated roundtable. The Digital Economist is an impact platform focused on thought leadership and bringing investable opportunities in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals to the fore. So we're very excited to welcome folks on January 23rd this evening, and looking forward to great partnership and a lot of value we create for the community along the way. So welcome.
I think we can start. Welcome everyone. For those who are just joining us this is just another episode of our Digital Economist speaker series. For those who are joining us for the first time, the Digital Economist is an organization that generates actionable insights and builds products and services for a human-centered digital economy. The Digital Economist has launched the speaker series to drive radical collaboration between global action leaders on the most urgent topics and challenges we face today, and those are climate, health, society, and economics. Our host today for today's show is going to be Mike Durrie. Mike is a fellow at the Digital Economist and our director of content. He's a commercial writer and communication expert with decades of experience across industries and topics, with a special focus on change communication. And our guest today is going to be Leslee Udwin. Leslee is a founder of Think Equal, a nonprofit dedicated to fostering culture and gender parity, non-discrimination, and non-aggression in societies all over the world. I would like to welcome Mike and Leslee, and for Mike to make a formal introduction to Leslee.
Thank you very much, Avinder. Yes, Leslee, this is a great honor and a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much. I'd just like to mention that Leslee is also a former filmmaker, and one of her best known works is the award-winning BBC documentary India's Daughter, about the gang rape and murder of the young woman Jyoti Singh in New Delhi in 2012. She's also the winner of multiple awards. We only have an hour, so I won't start trying to list them, but they include the UN Women for Peace Activist Award, which she received in 2019. So, Leslee, again, thank you. This is great. And I would like to ask you to begin by telling us about how Think Equal came to be.
Think Equal was a direct response to the film India's Daughter, which I made over a 2.5-year period in India. The problems that were delineated in this film, and they were through a gender lens, looking at the issue, the ubiquitous, relentless war of violence against women and girls that is waged the world over. I went to India only because there was a particular case there that ignited the conscience of the nation, brought out extraordinary numbers of men and women in passion, commitment, absolutely admirable determination to see an end to violence against their women and girls. And that's what drew me there to document this case. Once I got there, Mike, I realized that amplifying the voices of the protesters, which is what I had set myself as the mission, in making this film, it suddenly rang hollow to me. I suddenly thought, this is jargon. What am I talking about, really? Amplifying the voice of the protesters means adding awareness to the barrage of awareness we already have. How much more awareness in God's name do we need about gender inequality and gender-based violence? So I resolved that the only worthwhile way I could, spend my time in making a film about this case was to actually sit and look into the eyes of the very men who had perpetrated this horrendous crime, particularly brutal one. I mean, I'm always aware of how difficult it is to remind people of that, the very, very gruesome, brutal detail. But you know what? We have to keep remembering it. So it is important for me to say it, and I won't stint myself here. They pulled her intestines out of her body, having gang raped her over a period of 45 minutes as this bus made the rounds of these highways, right? I mean, okay. I knew that unless I could sit and look into those men's eyes and find out what kind of human beings can do this to another human being, there was really no point in making this film. So that is what I did. I persuaded the Director General of the maximum security jail they were incarcerated in to allow me to interview these men. And I did for 31 hours. Them and others whom I practiced on. Sounds perverse? Yes, I had to practice because I was raped at 18. So many of us are, right? And I was terrified that sitting in front of these rapists, I would, for the first time in my life, physically assault someone. That was my greatest fear. I mean, you mentioned that I won the UN Women for Peace Award. That wouldn't have been a good match. But I was convinced I would do that the ghosts from the past would just rise up in me. I'd look at these, what I thought were monsters when I first arrived. Look, let's just cut to the chase. The men were not monsters in any shape or form. They were programmed robots who we have programmed to think as they think and therefore act as they act. So what I discovered loud and clear and unequivocally was we are part responsible for these men's actions. And until and unless we take that responsibility and say, we should have intervened in the early years of development of these men to ensure that they did not grow up with the notion that girls are subject to different regulations. If they go out at night after dark, they're fair game. If a woman drives a car in another culture, this isn't about India. This is about all our cultures. It's about inequality in the UK, in the US, everywhere in the world. And until and unless we give our children a chance to have positive outcomes in life, we are breeding rapists. We are breeding, it was for me as simple as that. And that's what Think Equal came out of. I took a look, I did a lot of research, very diligently looked at, who is teaching our children a moral compass, values, competencies, skills that they require, how to regulate their emotions, Nobody's teaching it to them. We're leaving it to the parents. The parents are the least equipped to do so because they themselves have never been taught, and all the parents can do is generationally, cyclically pass down their discriminations to their children. So it is the responsibility of the educators, the policymakers, the governments, the ministers. It's their responsibility, and they have a duty of care for our children. How can they say it's compulsory for our kids to learn numeracy and literacy, but it's optional for them to learn how to love themselves and others, value another human being, lead healthy relationships? I mean, this is a massive gaping chasm in an education system that is not fit for purpose. What a long answer. I'll try and keep the next ones briefer. That's the one that I can't say quickly. Sorry.
Yes. No. Thank you, Leslee. I really appreciate that you are stressing that this is a global issue. And I'd like to also mention that Leslee is a valuable contributor to our recent policy paper we published on gender parity. It's titled "The Human Cost of Gender Inequality." You'll find it on our website. Check it out. There we have some quotes of Leslee's and some links. Leslee, I'd like to segue now into your current activities with Think Equal. What I'd like to know, what doesn't really come out in detail in the paper, is your teaching methods, how you arrived at them, and how they work in these preschool organizations.
So how I arrived at them is as follows. The first thing I did as part of my research was to look at what developmental stage of a human being's life are attitudes and behaviors yet modifiable, because that was critical. I didn't want to come in at an age where patterns of brain development were set and then we'd have to unlearn and relearn. I wanted to deal with this issue foundationally. So the research yielded, number one, that it's between 3 and 6. If you're looking at a school system, and of course I wanted a system, right? Because there's no point in achieving this for a few thousand or even a few 100,000 schools. This has to become a system change in a reimagined, repurposed education system. And therefore, we need access in order to do that. We can't get into the homes in a million years. I mean, forget it. It's not realistic. And really from 3, in many countries in the world, and increasingly so, governments are realizing that early years education is the fundamental and absolute key and gateway to sustainable human development. So now countries are increasingly, India is a fine example. They have just announced the NEP new education policy, which brings the age of compulsory schooling, free education, from 6 to 3. Perfect. Enter Think Equal, right? 3 to 6-year-olds. Moral development of a child also only begins at 3. The child's sense of identity starts to develop at 3. All of these were important aspects of research, which led me to identify the optimal window of opportunity to modify antisocial attitudes and behaviors into pro-social. So while I'm on this point, let me make it very clear. What Think Equal does, and the way the program's been designed, is to co-construct through tangible, concrete tools, pro-social neuropathways in the developing brains of our children. And we realized also from research that there was no earthly point in giving our early years practitioners, where they exist, because of course in some countries kids don't even go to school till 6. No point in giving them what governments currently have, which is useful for academics, but as far as practitioners are concerned, use it for any other purpose. Throw it in the bin if you like. It doesn't work to give practitioners whom you have hitherto treated as babysitters. You've undervalued them. You've underpaid them. You've underrespected them. And now you're turning to them and saying, hey, here's this wonderful curriculum framework for early years. We want you to deliver this. They look at it and say, what does critical thinking mean? What's this? What is? I mean, you can't. It doesn't match up. It's naive. So what we designed was a concrete, tangible set of tools that are prescriptive. It has to be so until such time as our teachers are trained in the early years, and we're moving that way, but it's going to take decades to achieve this. We don't have decades to achieve Agenda 2030. We have less than a decade now. This is urgent. Our children are growing up to rape, commit suicide, develop cardiovascular disease. All of these things are related to the lack of well-being and competencies and skills being taught to them, which can prevent all this easily. I mean, like that. And we've proven this. This is evidence-based now. Because we've been practicing this now for 3 years, since January 2017. We've proved concept. We have the most extraordinary transformations happening with currently 94,000 children in 15 countries. A 16th one is about to come on board, but 15 countries across 6 continents. It has to be prescriptive. I don't know if this is a sort of European-only analogy, but IKEA, have you all heard of IKEA? I call Think Equal the IKEA of the education system, because you don't need to have been a carpenter who's been trained for 3 years in cabinet making college, right? You go to IKEA, you buy your flat pack. It's ridiculously cheap compared to others, right? And you go home with the instructions, you set up the bookshelf. That is what we're doing with our teachers. We give them a flat pack for 3 age-appropriate levels. Level 1 is for our 3 to 4-year-old kids, level 2, 4 to 5, level 3, 5 to 6-year-olds. Every level has 30 weeks of magnificent, powerful, concrete programming, 3 lessons per week, because it has to be repeated, it has to be comprehensive. In those 90 lessons over the 30 weeks of each level, we teach 25 competencies and skills to our little ones. They include gender equality, racial equality, environmental stewardship, yes, collaboration, yes, emotional literacy, and all of the mindfulness, the sort of usual suspects, but very much amongst those 25 are skills that nobody's teaching our little ones, and they need them in order to thrive and become responsible global citizens. How do we do it? We do it through, actually, I didn't set this up, but I happen to have just one of our books here, but we have 80 books that we have created without one picture of a mother in front of a sink or a father with a briefcase and suit, right? We've created these books so that they mediate the world we want. They reflect the world we want. And these books are the change we want to see. Each level has, in level 1, for example, 22 narrative picture books like these, ranging across, showing from illustrated rather by illustrators from all over the world. So every book has indigenous people from Canada, from Mexico, Chinese kids, from every part of the world, all of Africa, different humanity in all its glory being celebrated throughout these books. Together with it, the teacher gets a booklet of 90 lesson plans, line by line. Gather the children into a circle. We always do that because we're co-creating. We're equal in that classroom, the teacher and the kids equally learning together. Next, read the book. Next, ask the children, have they ever, so it's all about, and it's not putting knowledge into the kids' heads, it's inviting debate and responses. You should see these 3-year-olds discussing amongst themselves. It's astounding. And they're at the peak of their performance. They are making, 2 billion connections. It's just insane how developed the brain is at that point. 90% of the adult brain is fully developed by 5. And that's it. And then they have a booklet of resources, which they use together with these. It's a plug and play, replicable, prescriptive, scalable, hugely inexpensive program. This amortizes over 10 years. And I say that because once you have invested in, okay, we're doing 2,350 classrooms in the Eastern Cape, the whole province of South Africa. We're starting there next year with government, agreed. 94,200 children. And we're going in like that in one go because we can, because of the way it's been designed. We go in, it costs X, not a great deal for all those kids. The total cost is under $500,000 for all those kids, right? But it's not 94,200 kids because you don't need to put any more money in over the next 10 years while these robust materials last. They only come out 1 week in a year. You don't need more money. You just carry on with the next cohort. So that's 940,000 children for the same amount of money. It works out as $2 per child. It's ridiculously cheap. And that's how it will change the world because it can.
Well, that's fascinating, and I love your analogy with IKEA and the flat boxes. But I just want to play the devil's advocate here for just a moment. I think you're talking about you're going into existing organizations, existing preschool institutes. Now, those institutes, depending upon where they are, whom they're run by, and so on, I'm just going to say that some of them are inherently not equal. That maybe the females working, the female staff members are treated differently from the way male staff members are being treated. Maybe there are racial inequalities. How do you overcome that? And what kind of resistance do you encounter?
So, fantastic question, and actually, it's got quite a few parts to it, that question, and I'm not sure if they were all intended, but it's racing around in my head. So much to say. First of all, let me say our greatest gift is the actual age group we're dealing with, because 99% of teachers in the early years are women. They are motivated. They have purpose to change the inequalities you speak of. The purpose of this unites them in a way that makes them change themselves as well as changing the children, because of course our focus is on changing the children. Now, as for resistance systemically, in terms of structural resistance, there is none, because it's another gift we have by being in this early years, right? Is that there's very little going on. The children play, they read stories, they play games, all of which very important, but there's no numeracy, literacy, heavy, big time in those ages that we are fighting for space within the syllabus. We get the space. No teacher yet out of, it's 9,000 teachers with our 94,000 kids. No teacher yet has said to us, we can't fit this in. We don't have the time in the day to fit it in. So that doesn't exist as a problem. It would from grade 1 onwards, right? When they start to have 820 mathematics, 910, and so it goes, right? It's not like that in the early years. Now, resistance. The extraordinary thing, and it still hits me in waves every time I think about it, I get really, really sad and disappointed. The only resistance we find is from so-called developed countries. And I have come to understand that there is not a single developed country in this world. That's been an eye-opener for me over the last 3 years, right? Because so-called developed countries, let me give you an example of Scotland. I'm going to name names and shame, because I'm sorry, it's not acceptable. You cannot live with the degrees of crisis, of development crises that we have in our world. Look at the gang violence, look at the knives being carried by our youth on the streets, and you can live with that and speak jargon and tell me this isn't going to work without even trying it? It's not acceptable, irresponsible, neglectful. So I'll tell you what happened to me in Scotland. I went to persuade, I think I met with about 100 odd teachers, showed them the film, took them right through the whole kind of, the connections and why A led to B, etc., and why this is so important, showed them what the program was, the tools, etc. They clearly liked the program. I mean, nobody can not like this program. Sir Ken Robinson put it together with Dr. Mark Brackett and Robin Stern from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, neuroscientist Professor Richard Davidson from Wisconsin-Madison University, Urvashi Sani from India, Vicky Colbert from Colombia. These are great geniuses in education. How can you what's not to like in this program when it's put together by such brains, right? But at the end of the presentation, I said, I'd love an indication of which teachers here would like to immediately embrace it, and we can talk about. And I didn't see hands going up. I saw 1, 2 hands. I was in shock. I'd never seen. Usually the uptake is like almost 100%. I say, listen, I'm in shock. What's happening here? Why? What? Those who don't want to, tell me why. And one guy puts up his hand and says, It's not that we don't want to, it's that we can't. I said, okay, can you explain that better for me? He said, well, we have a policy that this doesn't go along with. Our policy is of child-led free play. I said, okay, wait a minute, this is child-led. We're not putting things into the child's head. We're actually inviting the child to create the learning. It's definitely child-led. He said, no, it's not that kind of child-led. It's child-led that a child, you can only teach a child what the child comes to you and shows curiosity in and wants to learn about. So the child decides what to learn about. My heart sunk into my stomach. I packed up in silence all of my materials. I said, thank you for your time. I'm now leaving Scotland. I shan't return. There are a lot of countries to work with. Scotland will catch up in time. And the reason I'm leaving, I want you to know, is I've never come across a child who's interested in gender equality. Have you? And I walked out. Now, I've come across that a number of times in a number of similarly so-called developed or high-income countries. We have got lost in jargon and certainty that things work certain ways. We're no longer open to trying to solve our problems. And I think it's to do with a kind of despair, which doesn't, it seems to me, exist in what we term developing countries. They embrace it. They take the problems of the world more seriously somehow than we do. We've become so inured to these toxic, ghastly, mostly, it has to be said, and this is being said very objectively, man-made decisions, you know. We're moving into a new era where we have more women leadership, and that in honesty is going to really yield and be, you know, a part of moving into a more peaceful, more just and more equitable world, but it's taking a great deal of time. You know, the most glittering example of that now is Finland, where we have the top 4 government positions leading Finland, including the president, or is the prime minister? Forgive me if I got that wrong. 4 of 5 of which are under the age of 35 women. What a good piece of news, right? I mean, we are heading in the right direction, but that takes a very, very long time. But it seems that developed countries, high-income countries, they've kind of lost faith. They've kind of thought, there's nothing we can do. It's gone too far. Yeah, the world's gone to hell in a whatever the phrase is, but what can we do about it? It's too late. It's gone, you know. That's not true. We can fix this for the next generation so easily, cheaply, and scalably, and we're doing it. We're proving that. So it's a nonsense to say there are, you know, restrictive policies that stop us from doing what is such a no-brainer. This isn't rocket science. This is neuroscience. Very easy to implement. Another very good answer. Mike, what are you going to do with me?
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more in detail about the current successes. You know, you mentioned South Africa, and you've talked about advances in Latin America.
Yes.
Just maybe give us a few of the highlights.
A few highlights. So look, South Africa is a huge highlight, but I have to actually make the caveat that we are funded at the moment for 900 classrooms. We've got permission and a partnership with the government for 2,350. I'm still trying to raise, it's only $300,000. It's so ridiculously low amount, but we need to raise it by January. And so I'm still praying that's going to come in. I'm making every effort I humanly can, so that we can say this is an entire province from scratch. Otherwise, we'll do the 900 next year, we'll stagger it, and the following year do the rest. But we like to be inclusive. This is such a critical foundation for our children, for positive outcomes in their lives. We don't like to say, only you 900 classrooms can have it, and you guys have to wait. It's a terrible thing for us to deal with. Okay, that's one brilliant example, though, okay? Then we have Mexico, where we are in partnership with UNICEF in the poorest state of Mexico, Chihuahua, and partnering there also with implementation partners, Teach for Mexico, who are just amazing partners. And we're going ahead there. We're in Guerrero State, which is the most violent state in Mexico. And there we've started in just 400 classrooms, but half of them are indigenous and rural. And this is another great success for us because it proves we can go anywhere and this works, right? It doesn't have to be urban, sophisticated, no way. Then in India, we have a fantastic partnership with Kaivalya Foundation. We've started now with 630 classrooms. Jharkhand state has just gone in with the inauguration of, the teacher training, etc. And the district collector saw the materials and said, "What do you mean 100 classrooms? Immediately stretch it out to 1,600. So, little successes there. Now let me tell you our huge successes. 2 huge successes. We're in partnership with UNICEF, funded by the World Bank in North Macedonia. Every single 3 and 4-year-old child in the whole country who goes to school in North Macedonia is learning Think Equal. And the World Bank was so impressed by the feedback from the teachers. I mean, if you heard the stories of transformation they tell us, literally 3-year-old racists turning around, suddenly caressing that maid's arm who they wouldn't even let near them to feed them, saying, "Look, you are dark brown, which is like chocolate, and I am light brown like cinnamon. And do you see, we're both brown. We're just different colors brown, and we're one brown family." This is what the children are going home and saying, right? Because the learning's so concrete and absolute and evidential and obvious, right? So the World Bank said, now we give it to another 8,500 families who have 3 and 4-year-olds who are not going to school. So we're spreading out even further than the school system now. Plus, the biggest of all, Belize. Belize is our jewel in our crown. In our agreement with Belize is the word compulsory. And that is what we go for, because we say, if numeracy literacy are compulsory, social emotional learning should be compulsory. And in Belize, we're starting in January to train every single early years teacher in Belize, all the teachers of every child between the ages of 3 and 5 in Belize, and all children of 3 start going to school in Belize at the age of 3. Compulsorily, every single 3, 4, and 5-year-old in Belize is going to be learning Think Equal from next year. That's our biggest achievement.
Wow, that is a big achievement indeed. And I just wonder now, you've been talking about the work and the children's books and so on. And I mean, obviously you have. Your methods are evidence-based, you've been testing, but the organization is still relatively young. In terms of your thinking and your strategies, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the knock-on effects. I mean, this is one of the things, one of the ideas behind our policy paper on gender disparity is to say that where there's disparity, whether it's racial or gender related, where there's disparity, we all lose. Society loses, business loses. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your thinking in this regard, the knock-on effects of Think Equal.
The knock-on effects are so wide-ranging. It really, the foundation, who you are as a human being, affects everything you do, are, and become in your life. The knock-on effects of this are to create global citizens who care about the environment, who have learned at the age of 3 how to recycle and why they must recycle, who have learned how to conserve energy and why. This becomes a part of your DNA. Imagine the knock-on effect of that on climate for that next generation of stewards. Okay? You teach girls that they can be and achieve anything. the knock-on effects of that are huge. We know, and this brilliant article in the Digital Economist, brilliant article. Did you write it, Mike? Remind me.
Yes, I did.
It's brilliant.
Well, thank you.
I mean, of course, apart from my quotes, it's brilliant. No. I hope I didn't ruin it. No, the thing is, seriously, what a great, incisive and eloquent article that was. So, it says it all. You empower women, you empower societies, communities, and nations. The coffers of nations suddenly become, massively expanded. You teach boys to express their emotions and how to control them. You reverse this man up, don't cry like a girl that our fathers are putting our little boys in straitjackets with, right? We are setting them up to fall. We're setting them up to become depressed, to feel they've let a whole family down because they haven't manned up enough. I mean, it's toxic what we're doing to our children and our boys. So we teach them, we free them up so that they don't grow up to be depressed, to commit suicide. In the UK, the number one killer of boys, young men under 40, suicide. Not drugs, not cancer, not car accident, suicide. That's what we're doing to our children. So look at the knock-on effect that's going to be there. The knock-on effect on perpetration of violence and rape. In the UK, this is a fascinating and appalling fact. The most expensive piece of real estate there is in the UK is a prison cell. £48,000 per year to incarcerate one violent offender for 1 year. That can give Think Equal, and I'm doing it now in pounds, it's even more than I'm saying, 24,000 kids can get Think Equal for a year, which will change their mindset fundamentally. So that many of them, I won't say all because we don't know that yet. We've got to do our longitudinal studies and check it out more. But for sure, this program will at least halve, if not, I mean, I don't even want to use a measurement, but it will substantially reduce the perpetration of violence, right? Because when you believe that a Muslim is your absolute equal or a Jew is your absolute equal, you're not going to go out there and commit these acts of frustration and anger and kill people. So you're going to have less violent offenders. And for every child who grows up to not offend who would otherwise have without the Think Equal program, that's 48,000 each saved per year. I mean, what are we going to do with this increased GDP as a result of the falling costs of, for example, dealing with the fallout from violence? We'll have to build roads, we'll have to build hospitals. We'll have to improve our infrastructure. My goodness, what a thing. Plus, let me just take you even one step further. Well, I must mention, because of COVID, 100% Think Equal is a COVID response because it helps our children deal with the mental challenges that have come from this pandemic, the loneliness. We've actually written a book called Rainbows in Windows. I've got just the paper copy. This isn't the book itself, but I had just printed it last night. We wrote it with the World Health Organization, and it's a book explaining the pandemic to the little ones, doing exercises with them of relaxation, of dealing with the anger and the understanding that it's only a delay about not being able to see grandparents and friends and, all of that well-being, sense of well-being, to try and restore that in the face of the pandemic. The other example, so it's mental health, is also dealt with brilliantly by this program. But let's go to one far outlier. You would think, well, what can this possibly have to do with physical health? It's got everything to do with physical and public health, because now it is proven that cardiovascular disease and diabetes and cancer have, as one of the indicators of those diseases in later life, indicated in early childhood, is stress and anxiety in early childhood. And that is as strong a predictor of those three diseases I've mentioned in adulthood as any other predictor of those three diseases. This really fundamentally affects everything. And it is a disgrace if at that cost we don't as a world implement this to full saturation. We have to, it's our duty.
Well, thank you for that. That's those are some really interesting insights into these different dimensions of the program, and it's also a good segue to a question that comes to us from Satya Das.
Satya, I know Satya Das. He's a brilliant author and thinker. Satya Das from Edmonton.
There we go. So she's asking about the current situation in the pandemic, and I know I'm Canadian, but I'm located in Germany, and even in a supposedly very advanced, sophisticated Germany, there is a big uptick in addiction, alcoholism, and also domestic abuse in these pandemic times. Sadly, very sadly, and I wonder, beyond what you just mentioned, and this is her question about the role of Think Equal in breaking the cycle of violence.
Bless you for that question. Satya, first let me say that we, in March of this year, when I sent the whole team home before Boris Johnson did, because I saw he wasn't getting it right. So on the 12th of March, I told my team, you're going home now. We're working from home from now on until there's a vaccine and we know what to do. Okay. At that point, we started immediately putting all our energies towards how do we bring the program to the children who are now locked at home with their parents, i.e., so we I know this isn't really on the nub of answering your question, Satya, bear with me, but I just do want to, in the context of the pandemic, say we became immediately responsive. We adapted the program, and Satya, you know the program because it was in a whole school district in Edmonton, in Alberta, in Peace Wapiti, the most beautifully named Peace Wapiti in northern Alberta. Every junior kindergarten and kindergarten still, I believe, is implementing Think Equal. So you knew the program as a classroom-based only program. We now have a home kit version of that, so that we have complementary activities to the 3 half-hour lessons the teachers mediate to the children in the class. While the children are not in class and at home, we've made a digital version of the teacher program so that it can be accessed, but there's a big digital divide in inequality of access, which we worry about. But in addition to that, we've created a home-based program with 5 10-minute activities per day for the parents to do with the children, and those chime in with the class lessons so that they're not repetitive, they're just amplifying and they engage the parents. Plus, we've created a massive digital online platform, digitized not only our materials, but our training. So we now have 20-minute films, modules, teaching the program. Again, the real problem is, and I suspect amongst our viewers or listeners here, are people who can contribute and do something about this. We cannot leave much of our population behind without access to digital technology. We can no longer do that and hold our heads up high. We have to find ways. We have to lobby for those big tech giants. Give devices to everyone. This goes beyond the kind of horrendous greed. How much more money can you make? It's enough. They have to get responsible and get equal, because we're leaving so many behind by not giving them this, access. So that at times like this, pandemics are going to become more frequent. There's no question. We've been so irresponsible with the earth. What do we expect? It'll take decades to get back on keel if we behave responsibly. So in the meantime, we need to plug that gap. I would say there should be a compulsory tax on every tech giant who makes, or tech company who makes above a certain amount, a sort of enforced corporate social responsibility, as you have in countries like India, South Africa, very enlightened. They have to give 2% of their profits. to corporate social responsibility. Let's have an equivalent. What better platform to start lobbying for this? And I've never asked anyone else to lobby for this, but we have to. Please, would people on this call, you're well placed, I'm not, and my hands are full with my 18-hour days, 7 days a week. Please, will you think of ways of getting this technical digital community to stand up for their responsibilities in this? Let them pledge 1% even of their billions that they're making and give the devices so that we can start on an even playing field. Get the connectivity going. I know Google was talking about Google balloons at one point in space. Where are they? I mean, yes, use space to enable access to digital technology. Stop your boys' games of sending people up to a planet that can wait for several centuries, right? Spending trillions on that. Spend it on human beings. Become humane. Sorry about my tirade. I just feel it so strongly. It really upsets me. Satya, I didn't even answer your question.
Yeah, I wonder if we could just circle back to that. I mean, specifically, you showed us the illustration for the book about life during the pandemic and explaining the pandemic to children. Are there specific measures to address this upsurge in domestic violence or the stress that maybe families are encountering?
Stress, 100% the stress. The problem is, and this is where I have to just, level up. I can never be anything but completely transparent and honest, okay? We cannot really fundamentally affect the parents. I cannot pretend that we can do that, because if our theory is right, and I believe it is, neuroplasticity it does continue beyond the age of 6. However, that foundational stage where those neural pathways have either been pared away by, brain development pairing, that process that takes place, if the empathy pathways have been pared away by the time that husband is landing blows disgracefully upon his, partner, or the other way around sometimes happens, of course. But if that pattern is set at that point and there are no empathy pathways, and you can't fix that except by taking those adults through therapy, trillions of dollars you need to throw at them, and many, many years. All we can do, as far as I believe, is get it right from the first instance for the next generation. And I think we'd be naive if we thought we could affect that kind of change in the parents. This is the whole point of my saying it is hugely irresponsible and neglectful of us to not do what I'm advocating here. Because in not doing that, we limit ourselves and doom ourselves to only being able to deal with this problem in hindsight, after the fact, mopping up the blood once the damage is done, putting plasters on wounds. We're not tackling the root cause. And that's the difference. Having said that, I will tell you that we've had examples of parents coming into class, going to the teachers and saying, this thing you have, this thing with the 4 colors, the blue, the red, we need it at home. Where can I get this thing? Because it's the brilliant best practice Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence's ruler program, the mood meter, which helps our children identify what's the difference between fury and frustration. Very important to know that, because in one set of circumstances, the one is opposite, and in the other, it isn't. So, or in the other, frustration is more relevant, applicable. So, bottom line is the parents are learning to ameliorate their behavior a little bit, but fundamentally change their brains, their mindsets. Very difficult, as I think, after the age of 6, and certainly after the age of 17, 20. Game over, I think.
So just in strictly down-to-earth practical terms, if, let's say, I'm a parent, well, I am a parent, let's say I'm hearing about this for the first time, and I say, I want this stuff. I log on to the Think Equal website. Can I get it?
Yes. So initially, you've got 6 weeks worth of materials right there. All you have to do is put in your email ID, and you get 6 weeks worth. You can log in as a teacher or as a parent. There are 2 portals, and you immediately get 6 weeks worth for free of the books, the materials, the everything, but they're digital, okay? Usually we print them up for the classrooms. We can print them up for the homes. We will be doing that. We're not quite there yet. I believe we'll be able to pre-order possibly later in December or next year. It's incredibly cheap. It's $69 for 18, a whole series of 18 books, and you can have them any way you want. You know, you can have them also in cartoon form, because we're creating beautiful cartoons which are being voiced by amazing, wonderful actors like Olivia Colman and Matthew McFadden, and wonderful, wonderful actors have agreed. Dame Harriet Walter, brilliant actors. So we're going to have this all online within, you know, just watch that space. But for now, go in and grab those 6 weeks worth of, which we gave as a COVID response gift, if you like, those 6 weeks worth.
Brilliant. And the URL, if you could just tell our listeners.
The website?
Yes, the website. How?
It's www.thinkequal.org.
Very simple, very straightforward.
And
Thank you for that.
I always have to say, and actually I usually forget to say, but I've remembered this time, if there's anybody here who has a corporation who wants to show and really, you know, come to the drinking pool in terms of saying we not only stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, you know, dismantling systemic racism, violence, etc., gender-based, we act for it. We do welcome corporate partnerships. We have all the opportunities for branding as well. We have amazing assets that we can deploy. You know, we have patrons like Meryl Streep and Sir Ken Robinson, you know, extraordinary support, because people do believe that this, you know, and see that it's working. And so please reach out. I'm leslee.udwin@thinkequal.org, and I would welcome an email from anyone, and I always do, and I always respond. So, yeah, we have to join hands in this. This is a movement. It's not just a program. It's a movement. So...
Thank you so much for this, Leslie. This has really been a pleasure. I see Arvinder is waiting in the wings, and we are kind of approaching our final minutes. I did want to ask you, maybe just if you can sum it up in one sentence, if there's some very bold, audacious vision you have that you could just put in a few words, and then we'll hand over to Arvinder.
The bold, audacious, highly achievable vision is this: the missing subject, the most important subject in the world, social and emotional learning, has to be implemented compulsorily for every child in every classroom in every country in the world. Simple.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Arvinder, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you, Mike.
You so much.
And thank you, Mike, and thank you, Leslie. It was amazing to to hear that conversation, and just to add, I think it's highly important that gender equality is taught from a very early age. I've lived in 3 countries, and I've seen the problem is systemic all over the world, and it's not specific, to one culture. It's in different shapes and forms, and I completely agree with Leslie that this kind of education has to be embedded from a very early age on. I just wanted to remind our listeners and our viewers that the TD puts together these kind of talks on a regular basis. We have a weekly Digital Economist talk series. Our last one is going to be next week, and then we take a break for the winter, and we will start the second season in January. So we also have a Center of Excellence where we put out papers on some very specific key issues like the one Mike mentioned. So you can check us out on thedigitaleconomist.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We're very active on both Twitter and LinkedIn. And if you have any feedback, you can send us an email at info@thedigital.economist.com. And finally, if you have a particular speaker that you would like to listen to, then you can nominate a speaker yourself. And you can do so by sending us an email at info@thedigital.economist.com or by...
Satya Das. He's brilliant. He's a brilliant speaker. Satya Das.
Satya Das, definitely. I think we've taken a note of it, and we'll ask Satya to we'll reach out to you, or maybe send us an email, and we'll definitely respond very quickly. But thank you for that.
Mehrbani, bye. I'm off to do another country. Bye.
Bye.